All right, let's go ahead and get started. Looks like we've got quite a few participants. Thank you all so much for joining our session today, The Age of Personalization, Shifting Strategies, and Maximizing Yield through Individualized Communication, Yield, and Aid Strategies, featuring Jennifer McCord, Christy Collins, and our very own Scott Ochander and Mike Keane with Maguire. This session is especially timely given the news that we just shared yesterday about Maguire officially joining the Carnegie family. We are so excited to welcome them to our team and especially excited about how this allows us to obviously better serve our partners. So before we get started, I did want to share a few quick housekeeping items. This session will be recorded and we'll be providing links of the recordings to all attendees. All session attendees are on mute and off camera, as you may have noticed. And while the chat function is on for any questions you all have for the speakers or help that you might need throughout the session, please use the Q&A function. We'll be monitoring that during the session, and time permitting, we'll cover as many questions as possible at the end. For any of you that need help throughout the conference, you can email marketing@carnegiehighered.com. And of course, check out the event hub page for agenda info at any time. Finally, we encourage you to connect with your network during or after the sessions and use hashtag the connection and tag @CarnegieHQ. And with that, I'm excited to introduce our speakers today, Scott Ochander, Partner and Chief Leadership Strategist at Carnegie, Mike Keane, VP of Client Strategy at Maguire, Jennifer McCord, VP of Enrollment and Marketing with Asbury University, and Christy Collins, Dean of Enrollment Management with Pepperdine University. And I'll hand it over to Scott and the team to take it away.
Hey, thanks, Sheridan. Can everyone hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up that we're good? Okay, awesome. Awesome. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you. And actually, for my friends, three of us here on the call from the Pacific North, well, from the West, good morning, not good afternoon. So great to see everybody. Look forward to a great discussion today on this sort of kind of topic around this individualized needs and issues inside of higher ed. So we really look forward to a good discussion with our great panel. And to begin with, I would be remiss in not mentioning the wonderful news we had this week. Our friends at Maguire Associates and Mr. Keane, Dr. Keane, himself is joining us today, and we're really excited to have Maguire join the Carnegie family, and look forward to what that will mean for us as a full service marketing and enrollment firm out there in higher ed. So great to have all of you here this week. I want to start by just kind of laying the groundwork for this topic. So we're thinking about this age of personalization. We're thinking about what that might mean. And we would be remiss as a panel to not sort of step back and look at the landscape and sort of talk a little bit as a context set. Why have we gotten to this point where personalization matters? And so there's so many things happening in higher ed. You know, obviously we could talk about the sort of new normal coming out of the pandemic. We could talk about weakening demographic demand and the cliff and all of that thing. We could also talk about things like the elusive consumer and how Gen Z itself is just really behaving quite a bit different from, past generations in terms of how they're approaching higher education. I often think about this through my own lens as a father of two Gen Zers, and I think about their 4-inch screens and how I have to sort of pry their eyes away from them on a given day and what that might mean. But there's also a lot of other things happening, macroeconomic factors like, well, many people talk about on the advancement side of the spectrum of wealth transfer, where we see the trend towards 50 trillion with a T, $50 trillion in assets migrating from the boomer generation into the millennial and Xer generation, who are now the parents of our lovely prospective students these days. We see on the macro level politically, people questioning the value and cost of higher education. And as a result, many of the predominant views in higher education are around outcomes and how do we deliver more results for students when they go through the programs that they do, and that really affects a lot of folks in the industry where this is a function of learning and learning to learn, and it doesn't matter necessarily what the degree is in a given moment, depending on the institution and the focus on growth for some of our students. And the last thing we see is like this ever changing landscape of new communications channels and or shifting communication channels, new privacy laws, new channels coming into play, into blur, and others blurring and going away. And how do we manage all of this? So my first question for the panel is really just to think about how are campuses sort of adjusting to these challenges? This is pretty immense. There's lots going on, and then how are you mitigating these changes on campus? So I'll start here with my friend Christy from Pepperdine. So Christy, what do you think about this? How are you migrating change on your campus, and how are you adjusting to this?
Oh, well, it's a great question. And the phrase that jumps out to me, especially from your previous slide, is that phrase elusive consumer, because I feel like that characterizes so much of our pool right now in many ways. And for us in particular, I would say that we are struggling at Pepperdine with a major lack of predictability. I mean, the good old days when we used to be able to predict pretty much anything and everything. We knew that 1 + 2 = 3, and that just is not really the case anymore. And I mean, at Pepperdine right now, we are, I don't love using the word struggling here, but we're struggling with massive over enrollment for the second year in a row. And the reason why we're at that point is because we're still figuring out, honestly, how to adjust to these challenges, how to respond to these elusive consumers that we think are going to behave a lot differently than they actually behave. So one of the things that we've had to manage is how we move forward without having those same components of predictability that we've had in the past.
Oh, interesting. Jennifer, what do you think about the same topic?
Yes, so here at Asbury, we have a lot of the same challenges. The customer is definitely elusive, and we're seeing the Gen Z and the Gen X, but also the boomer generation being represented in the students, but also in parents and grandparents. We have a really large contingency of our prospective students who are being raised by their grandparents. So our admissions counselors and our marketing messages are really having to shift to hit each one of those components in a really clear and concise manner. And coming out of the pandemic, let's all agree that we are out of it, right? But coming out of it and being on this end of it, we found that in the middle of a pandemic, the generation shifted from millennials being who our target audience was into this Gen Z audience. And they look a lot like millennials, but they are not the same. And this audience really is looking for this personalization and how to customize their message. Everything that they see on those little 4-inch screens is customized to them. They have grown up with Netflix and Amazon Prime and being able to get something delivered the next day or same day in some cities. And so we have had to very quickly understand who our audience is from the student perspective, just to get affinity, just to be known in our own backyard, but also in the region, to be able to connect with them, to let them know we're here. And that's been a huge benefit that we've used with some partners, including Carnegie Dartlet, to be able to say, okay, who is our customer and how are we changing those messages to deliver to that person a personalized, customized message directly where they want to receive it, how they want to receive it. And that's been really valuable in how we're building and how we are attacking a little bit of, we're on the opposite side of where Christy and Pepperdine are. We're on the side of, we don't have enough applications in the traditional funnel to hit the numbers we need to hit this year. But being able to tweak those messages and really get to the heart of what that person wants to see and that it's different from the best friend sitting beside them, that because that message to the best friend is seeing something different that speaks to them from the same university, has been really key in helping us drive to the numbers where we are. And we're up about 20% year on year right now with our
Awesome.
deposits and matriculation. So we're excited to see the difference in how that's working.
Awesome. Very good. Mike, I want to jump in here, but I think I might hold you just to the next one, because I know it's an area that you're really really passionate about. When we think about markets, it's interesting to hear, Pepperdine is over enrolled, and Asbury is under enrolled, so like with the growth trajectory. So you have this sort of dynamic of markets and thinking about how your market dictates your possibilities. Mike, what are you learning from the sort of predictive analytics spectrum around markets and how markets behave, relative to, say, maybe geographies or different things like that you can bring into the equation here?
Sure. Yeah, I think that over the course of the last 3 years, which I think to Christy's point have been a challenging time to be involved in predictive analytics in higher education. I think first we acknowledge that on a good day, pre-COVID, it's difficult to predict the behavior of your typical 18-year-old, but layered on that with all of the change over the past few years, one of the things that has emerged when we consider the institutions with which we work, when we consider the institutions we're observing outside of that, is to the regional differences we're seeing and the differences we're seeing versus sort of rural and suburban versus urban campuses. And one of the examples that comes to mind fits with Christy's experience, which is that to our perspective, it's been a very good year for institutions near population centers on the West Coast. Part of that is a story about international students and the East Asia markets and the pipelines built there. But part of it, I think, is also that we've, in the midst of COVID, stopped worrying quite as much about the demographic shifts that didn't stop during COVID, right? And so that there are challenges, particularly pronounced challenges in the upper Midwest and in New England and in some of the Northeastern markets around a dwindling population, which means more competition, which I think accelerates this imperative that these strategies be more individualized and speak more directly to students, especially Gen Z and meeting those students where they are. So I think there's a lot to say about predictive analytics in the last few years, but one of the things that really stands out is some of those regional differences.
Oh, interesting. And maybe just to carry that a little further, and I'll take it back to my colleagues at Pepperdine and Asbury. How is your current market sort of affecting your strategy? So, I'm really curious to hear this. We've got this very, different perspective from the different markets. So how are those markets affecting your marketing and enrollment strategies? Let's start with Jen this time first.
Yes, so we are looking at who is in our market and really how do we came to understand about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that we were not well known even in our backyard. So we compete down the road with the University of Kentucky and Transylvania University and some other amazing universities just right here in our backyard. And many high school students knew those universities, but just didn't know about Asbury. It just wasn't really well known. So we worked very hard to try to figure out how do we, again, customize the message, get it into the place where they're going to receive the message. And those things were very uncomfortable to us. Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, all those types of different mediums versus a billboard or a traditional newspaper article or ad, that caused some definite change in how we do things on this campus. And so being able to understand who is our market, and then how do we go and saturate that market as much as we can while competing with the other larger universities in our sphere. And that personalization, customization message has really been key to help us to stand apart from what they're seeing everywhere else. So the question is, how do they just see purple and white, and how does that compare to the blue and white, or how does that compare to the red and black? And how do we stand out in that? So we really have to look at the personalization piece, who is in our backyard, and how do we bring that backyard, that feeling, that creativity to that message to be able to stand apart. So that's what we're doing. And we're really changing a lot of what our strategy has been in the past. We're doing things a lot different. And that really starts with this personalization piece. So we're changing everything that a prospective student could see and running it through the lens of more of this Instagram generation. So they want to see things that are visual. They want to see authenticity. They would much rather hear and see current students in their current environment than a staged photo shoot. They don't want to read a lot of words. They really want to be able to see what we're trying to tell them the story of in picture format and short video format. So we're shifting all of that communication strategy to that short form, easy to read, easy to comprehend story, visual story, which is drastically different than where we've been up until the last 2 years. So that's the main way we're really trying to get into not only our backyard, but regionally, and then also into our international population.
Awesome. Yeah, as I've heard many of my colleagues say, you have to feel the message. Christy, what about you? How do you sort of see the same dynamic of current markets affecting, and what are you doing maybe a little bit different these days in a different scenario?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, I'm definitely inspired, Jennifer, by all that you are doing. I think and admit that we need to do more of that at Pepperdine. So I love hearing how that's been working for you. You know, our market in California is with the privates in California is hugely impacted by what the public institutions are doing, and the more competitive that the UCs and the Cal States are becoming, the more applications and interest we're seeing at the privates, just because there's only so many spaces to go around in California and in Southern California in particular. So whenever there's a big change in the UCs, we really feel that in the privates. And I think that is one of the reasons why we have had an over enrollment. So that is purely market driven. I am controlling nothing of what UCLA is doing, of course. So that's certainly an impact of the current market. I would also say, though, in terms of the individualization and what we're doing, it's more specifically on the financial aid awarding side. We've partnered with Maguire for a decade or more, and that is where a lot of our really, really specific personalization comes down to. And that has certainly worked for us. And I think that has been one of the reasons why we are actually over enrolling. And we need to be making tweaks on the actual number of students that we are admitting, because our financial aid modeling is working really, really well, perhaps too well. So we're doing so well there that we're generating more net tuition revenue year over year. Our discount rate is going down, and we're over enrolling. All these things that shouldn't be possible at the same time are happening right now.
Awesome. Amazing. It makes me think a lot about, this idea of the funnel and where that's headed, so in sort of one of the things I've sort of thought about is this sort of model of sort of putting students in the front end of your cycle. As a former VP myself, this is sort of the living and dying I did in the years in ancient history when I actually did that role. It's not that the funnel's dead, it's just changed. I think a lot about this these days and how is it changing? And to me, I sort of see it less in terms of app stat, whether we have the right number of inquiries or the right number of admits or the right number of FAFSA filers, whatever that sort of application status might be, and more thinking of it like this, where I'm looking at that funnel down from the top down and looking at this sort of very different world that we're encountering these days. And Jennifer was talking a little bit about this in many respects. And in my day as a VP, sort of this search bubble here that I'm using my mouse, hopefully you can see it. That was like the only thing you could kind of see, from the top down. And now we see this multi-channel universe that is really more like a diverse ecosystem, where we have a nonlinear system where prospective students and families are sort of engaging in all sorts of different channels and different sort of timings than we would have normally expected. And so, what I think has really happened, sort of in the sort of post-pandemic new normal, is that we see that the prospective student is actually now in control of the enrollment cycle. And I think that is really, really new. I don't think that was the case pre-pandemic. I think, it was moving this way. We could say that the demographic cliff that we were facing in 25, 26 and all of that was sort of, leading us to that conclusion. But I think we shifted the sort of macroeconomic theory from being a supplier dominated industry to being in a buyer dominated industry. So I'm curious to hear, sort of from my colleagues here, how is this buyer's market mentality? How is it changing your marketing and enrollment strategy? What are you doing, and how is it causing you to think differently? Let's see. I'll start with Christy. Yeah,
okay,
go ahead.
I'll jump in here quickly. I mean, it used to be one of our goals long ago. So simple, to create shareable content. That was really like the social media strategy, right? So simple, and that worked for us for a while. And now we, who loves to predict everything at Pepperdine, are trying to be more comfortable with entering into that space where there's less predictability in order to sort of reach that elusive consumer that you talked about earlier. And for example, one of those ways that Jennifer and I have talked about is the college tour. Pepperdine will be a part of that coming up. And with a college tour, there's a lack of ROI on Netflix, and we can't track all the clicks and all the views. And historically, it would have been terrifying and just not done to make that kind of financial investment in something that didn't have that ability for us to track that ROI so closely. So for me and us here, we are having to let go of some things and to do some things that feel a little bit scarier. And then also saying yes to new search partners. I mean, I feel like every day there's new ways to buy student names. And I feel like it used to be so easy, and it's not anymore. And what I need to do is to stop thinking about the good old days and to be more adaptive and creative going forward.
Oh, I think that's a great answer. Jennifer, what do you think about this topic? It's such a big one.
Oh, it's huge. Yes, sir. And Christy, we are so excited to have you guys being a part of the college tour. It has been an amazing investment for Asbury University. So we're in season 3 of the college tour, and we had the exact same concerns, Christy, that I'm sure a couple of you guys have had, that I've seen a couple of people pop up and say that you all are in different seasons. And I would assume that many of us that have had that college tour experience can say, from your earlier chart, Scott, where you had all of those different things, the nonlinear ecosystem, with our staff and many higher education marketing staff, communications teams, admissions counselors, it would really be challenging to try to create all of that content, to tell the same story, to get it all across the entire ecosystem, very similar and telling the same thing. And the college tour really ramped that up. So for us, just saw a chat that said, what is the college tour? So let me explain it really quickly. The college tour is an Amazon Prime television series that you can go to Amazon Prime and click on the college tour, and it's just a series on Amazon Prime and some other streaming places. And they go into a university and they do an in-depth 30-minute or 60-minute episode on that school. But the key thing there is that they tell it from the perspective of the students, the alums, the faculty, whatever the university picks to have on there. And the brilliant part of the college tour is that they are 2-minute segments. So you can decide your topics and then who's going to speak on those topics. And they shoot the video, they edit it, and they package it into an episode for Amazon. But the brilliant part of it is you then get all of those episodes and those segments divided out. So you're able to use that in all of your marketing in 2-minute segments, in email campaigns, in videos, on YouTube, on your website, on landing pages, on everywhere that you can think of. We've even texted some of these segments out. So you can be very specific on which segment you're doing and why, and who is the target audience, whether or not anybody on Amazon Prime ever sees it or not. And what that did for our marketing team and our admissions team was it gave them tools in the toolkit to be able to show a personalized, customized, short, visual, authentic message to that customer. So that was key for us on that college tour. So sorry, Scott, to go down that rabbit hole.
I'm pulling you back out. Talk to me.
So those are really key. The other thing is the college tour, but also the customized emails and the drip campaigns, and always being in front of the customer from a perspective of just getting them to understand their brand and how important it is that all of that story is very authentic. And that what they see on the college tour is what they see on your website. And what they see on the website is what they see in social media and on every social media account. That was one thing my marketing team really had to get our arms around, was we had social media accounts out there with Asbury's name on it for everything. And there were students running them. There were professors running some, and sometimes the students weren't here any longer. And we really had to get our arms around that and create social media brand standards and a team that actually meets once a month to talk about what does the upcoming month look like for them individually, but then also from a macro standpoint. So it's just very important for that audience to have that authentic message in a visual place and to be able to access that same story across all mediums. And it's hard. So the fact to have partners to do that really supports your team. And so partners that can actually be extensions of your team to tell that message is really critical.
Yeah, thank you. And Mike, what are you seeing? I mean, from a more macro perspective, are you seeing trends that are worthy to mention here in this space? I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I think that the dominant trend we see when it comes to understanding and predicting some of the outcomes in this buyer's market is fragmentation. And some of it gets to what Christy mentioned, that you go from maybe 3 to 5 sources of prospective student names to 30 to 40. And not only that, but 30 or 40 sources where you might not have strong historical data to get a sense of behavioral patterns. And the other is, the example here is that pre-COVID, at many institutions, the campus visit was the gold standard of predictive models of yield, right? And then we have this profound disruption in the final few months of the fall 20 cycle, and then at many institutions throughout the fall 21 cycle. And now we can adjust to that by creating indices of digital engagement. But there are a lot of different ways that students get engaged virtually and digitally with the institution, and they aren't all created equal in terms of their signal about intent to enroll or intent to apply. And then we get into the fall 22 cycle, and now students are returning to visit campus, but they're also still engaging digitally and virtually, and trying to make sense of all of this has been a challenge, and our tools are getting better, our approaches are getting better. But I think the major theme of it all is fragmentation. There are so many points of entry for students, and there are so many points of engagement for students with institutions that it's an increasing challenge to weight those and analyze those appropriately so you can try to get some signal through all the noise.
Thank you. That's awesome. I think this is a great topic and one that we're going to talk about a lot in the future. I thought about the analogy is sort of the opposite effect of the current housing crisis, where the seller is in control of everything these days in housing. What happens when it inverts? And that's sort of what higher ed is going through right now, where the buyer's really in control and they can command price and timing and all sorts of things that we're not used to as an industry. So, one other thing that I was thinking about too is this idea of sort of individualization and how you do that. So, you could look at things like demographic individualization. So things like program or GPA, with which we've done a lot of in this industry. We have honors programs, we have merit scholarships, we have different things like that. We have need scholarships that are based on income level, things like that. So historical facts, like demographics, or we could look at things like psychographics, where we're talking about the motivations and the behaviors and the desires. And in the center of that, you have predictive modeling that sort of looks at all of these factors and tries to discern mathematically what makes sense. And so I think I'll focus a little bit more on this next topic around, for you, Mike and Christy, since I know you've worked, Christy, you mentioned working with Maguire for a long time, but I'm sort of curious what you think about the future of financial aid optimization. Is a grid or an individual model a better yield strategy? If we're moving towards a day where yield matters more than other things, which way is the best way, and how are you managing something like the complexity of individual aid modeling versus something like a grid where it's more bucketed and things like that? So Mike, let me start with you there, and then we'll kick it to Christy.
Sure. And so just a brief moment of introduction here, that when we talk about individualized financial aid optimization at Maguire as part of the Carnegie team, what we're talking about is an award that is designed for every individual admitted student in your pool, and then attached to them so that you can communicate that via upload to your SIS or CRM. And the goal there is that because they are attached to individual students, there's more granularity, and you're able to respond to more individual student level factors or contextual level factors. And the long-term goal is more efficiency in terms of meeting your goals, but also doing some of the things that Christy and her team at Pepperdine have been able to do so well, which is to meet those goals and move the needle on so many of those things while controlling discount and while growing net revenue, so the university can continue to invest in its enrollment operation. I think the key here is that whether it's a grid or an individual strategy is what is the best for your institution. So we do sometimes work with institutions where we'll leave that open. We'll say, give us a couple months, let's work through the data together, and let's determine whether we would recommend an individualized strategy. And we don't always, because there's context, there's about the market, there's about the size of the admit and enroll pool, there's the institution's desire, or in the case of public institutions, potentially regulatory requirements to publish institutional aid strategies. So there's a variety of considerations there, but I think the exploring individualized aid optimization is one way that institutions can respond to this very noisy, very fragmented world, which is, if there's an opportunity, even if it's only 1 or 2% more explanatory value, if there's an opportunity to get a little bit more explanatory value and focus those limited institutional aid resources where they can be of most benefit to students and help meet enrollment goals, then it's certainly worth exploring, knowing that this is ultimately a decision that's a function of your market, your size, your constraints and your goals. And that's certainly something that we try to work through with our client institutions.
Well, I don't know about you, and I'll kick it to Christy, but a lot of institutions would really do a lot for 1 or 2% yield gain. Yeah. So that's pretty massive from my perspective. Christy, how is it going with you, and what do you want to add to this conversation?
We obviously utilize an individualized awarding model at Pepperdine, and it has worked extremely well for us. And one of the things that I love about it is it allows us to really focus on very specific and unique populations of students, and allows us to test those things beforehand, to really play with the numbers and see, like, okay, if we increase this to this or decrease this, then this is what our final pool is going to look like. Now, we're over enrolled, but that just means we have more of each student in each, it's much broader and more complex than student group, but for lack of better words, I'll say that. And in my mind, the only negative thing about having an individualized model is that the average person cannot make a prediction on what their award is going to be. It is truly, truly individualized. But I also think that having an individualized model, individualized financial aid strategy has really resulted in us hearing from different types of students who are actually calling our office for more financial aid. I think we've had a decrease in calls for or requests for more financial aid since using an individualized model, while also seeing the over enrollment, like I've said, and it is. I'll just say that the model at Pepperdine is one of the things that most of our leadership team is very proud of, because it has contributed so positively to the overall bottom line of the institution's.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Oh, did someone want to add something? Or did I cut you off? I didn't mean to.
No.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. I think a lot about this as chief leadership strategist. I talk to schools across the country, and one of the key drivers of enrollment performance is certainly their financial aid model, and an individualized model seems to be the benefits seem to far outweigh to me that of a grid model. And the other thing I hear about is how do I segment more specifically? Even one of the questions in the chat from our friends at SUNY Binghamton, it was sort of in that lane, like, we're segmenting on program, or we're segmenting on academic level, and those are sort of demographic markers in sort of segmentation modeling. One of the things that I've come to really believe in is that if you can get away from programmatic segmentation, you'll have a much better chance of improving yield. And that is just simply because students change their mind about what they want to do with their life too often to sort of keep them solid inside of even a single enrollment year, in treating them with a program. And so, in that space, I sort of often think about this idea of what do you say to people? How do you know what to say to people to get them to be both attracted to you, and, as Jennifer said, also authentically attracted? So we want that authentic attraction. And one of the ways that we do this is sort of through psychographic darts, as we call them, thinking about the personalities of students and how, their sort of preferences for image and copy and what their communications usages result in a sort of a specific strategy that can exist beyond that of a single program or a single college within a school, and treat a student more authentically based on who they are as a human and how they connect to an institution as also a human. And so, when you break that down, we're seeing results like those on your screen here. You break down an Instagram campaign like you have here from our friends at St. Ambrose, where you see very specific video messages across different psychographic profiles. And that leads to something like, 26% increase in student web traffic and 20% increase in enrollment, because the yield is the focus there and the authentic attraction is the focus. So with our remaining time, I guess I would like to ask our panelists to sort of weigh on this one idea. So I want to leave everybody with something. And so what would you recommend? What can be implemented right now in this cycle to sort of, as you see it, meet individual student needs and expectations in a better way? What would you say to this group? You've got, hundreds on the line, 367 actually on the line. What would you say to this group? How do you give them advice as they head out into the next cycle's year worth of planning? And Jennifer, let me start with you this time.
Couldn't find the mute button. Yes. So, as we look at, and Scott, let me just clarify, are you asking for this cycle that ends?
If you can, yeah, no,
okay.
No, I'm sorry. Now I'm asking for 23. Yeah, we're past this one. I know you might still be in it, but
we are still really in it.
Yeah, no, we're thinking about the upcoming. I should have said upcoming, my bad.
Exactly.
But yeah, for 23, what can they do now to really meet individual student needs and expectations? So what would you recommend, Jennifer?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing that I would recommend is that the leadership team that has to make decisions on your campus are fully aware of what the market is doing. So what higher ed is doing, but also what your market is doing for your school. And what I mean by that is, historically, at least on our campus, decisions weren't made super quickly, nor were things acted on super quickly. Lots of, again, we have to be very thoughtful, and things have to go through committees and the right channels and those kinds of things. But for those of us on this call, when we're working in this fast-paced environment with these students making decisions very quickly and also very thoughtfully, and having to respond to what's happening in the pandemic, what's happening with the generational change, what's happening just in your current region. You know, our region has been hit with a lot of just natural disasters lately. So how do we respond to those students that now don't have a school or a home to go to because a tornado took out their entire city or their entire town? How do we respond? And sometimes if those responses have to go through all the committees, you miss the opportunity. So being able to prepare your leadership team that there are times where decisions and actions have to be made super quickly, and knowing the reason why now, I believe, will set you up for ease of adjustment when you see that you need to make an adjustment quickly, or you need to go find more budget and have the reason why, because they understand now from a macro level what's happening and what you're contending with day in and day out. So that would be my first thing. And then my second thing would be to understand very deeply, first and foremost, this generational shift. It cannot be understated of how this generation wants to be communicated with. It is really different than other generations, but then also to understand very, very easily what their parents and grandparents want to hear and what moves them to action. And those things would be that personalization, that customization, and how do you tie that together in a cohesive, concise story to move them to action very, very easily and quickly. That would be where I would start.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's
You're
great.
welcome.
Mike, you want to add in here?
Sure, I'd say that, and this is going to be a very stereotypical answer from the person who's responsible for predictive analytics, but I think being intentional about measurement, and I promise I'll get back to why this serves students, but I think in this sort of chaotic, fragmented world where you're pushing all of these buttons and pulling all of the levers and all of these various ways that you're communicating to students and inviting students to engage with you, there's many times where we have conversations with institutions where they say, hey, we've tried this new campaign. We're curious about whether it matters for app conversion or yield. And we say, okay, can you tell us, who opened the email? Can you tell us who followed through? Can you tell us who engaged? And they say, well, no. And so I think the intentionality about measurement means that you cannot assess all of these efforts until you start to collect the data to permit that assessment. And that's always going to be lagged 1 year from being able to act on that data. So I think from the analytics consultant point of view, I think the institutions are better able to serve their students as they're engaging in an intentional process of assessment and data collection, so that you can decide what channels are not working and focus your resources and focus your staff time on the channels that are generating authentic engagement with students and giving students the information that they're looking for.
And Christy.
I would say my answer is kind of a combination of the last two that we heard. And I love that slide that we had earlier where we had the enrollment ecosystem with all of the sort of the exploded funnel, if you will. And I think it's important for us as institutions to be able to pinpoint all those different components of the ecosystem and match sort of the resource allocation to those things, so we can talk to our leadership about that. So we can talk clearly about the things that we implemented during the pandemic, whether it was mailing students more stuff that was really, really expensive. And we did that with the money that traditionally we would have spent on events. But now we know, like, we need to keep doing those high touch pieces, putting things in students' hands while also returning to some of the more expensive traditional forms of recruitment. It's sort of like figuring out how to do a little bit more of everything. But in order to do it effectively, you need to be able to measure what works and to be able to assess, okay, what are the things that are actually leading a student to walk on campus in August?
That's amazing. Thank you all as panelists. And I would just add one last thing to the audience here, and that's just thinking about the key primers that drive. What are those key variables that drive your conversion rate in yield? If yield is the new strategy, you could look at something like aid optimization and say, is my aid optimization model currently set up to sort of drive the maximum yield conversion? Is my brand segmentation set up in a way that can do that? And we showed examples here of being able to, some schools being able to use either one of those variables to sort of drive better yield modeling. The third leg of that, of course, is your operational leg. And is your operations and the way that you approach your enrollment recruitment with your staff and your CRM and your slate drips and everything else, are you measuring the micro conversions, and are you developing a model within the operational flow that also is geared toward yield? And so each of you might answer that question a little bit differently. And I would just say to you, sort of pick which area you think has the most critical ability to be addressed and to be optimized based on what you're currently dealing with, and focus your energy on that one thing versus trying to do a little bit of everything. Because the one challenge with a little bit of everything is you almost get everything moving a tiny bit, but not enough. And so I think with that, we are right on time. And Sheridan is probably about to tell me, like, stop talking. It's been great to have you all. Again, thank you to our panelists, and thank you to our audience today. I hope it was very valuable to you to join. And please do join the next sessions. So
yeah, thank you all so much for joining the session today. And obviously an enormous thank you to our speakers as well. If you all do need any help throughout the conference, please email marketing@carnegiehighered.com. And I posted the link to the event hub page in the chat, so you can take another look at the agenda to add sessions to your calendars. But the next session coming up is from UPSIA and focused on institutional readiness for the post-pandemic learner, which starts at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So thank you all again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Bye all.